Okay, good morning everyone, and thanks for joining us for our in-depth discussion of big data and big data monetization. I'm quickly going to introduce the panelists and then we'll get straight into the session. Try and keep it interactive. If you have a question at any point, raise your hand and I'll try and bring you into the discussion. So to introduce our panelists, to my immediate left is Alain Nochimowski from our hosts Viaccess-Orca. He is EVP of Innovation. To his left is David Sanderson, who is head of Sky AdSmart in the UK, one of the early innovators with the use of big data in targeted advertising. And to his left is Antonio Carvalho from Liberty Global, and he is VP for Research and Insights, day-to-day using big data for analysis of Liberty's customer base, particularly from the TiVo box information. So I've divided the discussion this morning into a number of key themes, and we're going to try and work through all of those this morning. But my first theme is timing. And I guess the big question is, to all of the panelists, but I think I'm going to start with Antonio, what's taken so long with the use of big data?
Well, it depends on the field you're talking about, I guess, because big data is part of, I guess, of our, it's okay? It's part of our everyday life anyway, I guess, in many, from weather to many areas. In terms of thinking particularly about Liberty Global, a lot of it was around privacy. I think for several years we didn't do a lot of work in this space because we were, there's privacy concerns in terms of what data you can collect, how you can use them. So in many ways we were growing the company through acquisitions and mergers, and now that we are in a space where we want to leverage our scale and really go to the next phase, and we went through a restructure at Liberty Global, really with the customer in focus. We started in the last 2 years to have a much stronger focus on data. So we were kind of late, we were trying to catch up, but for us it was more about the growth of the company and the privacy elements, which is still harder, I guess, to deal with anyway.
Okay, well, we're going to come on to privacy later, but Alain, is it simply the volume of data, do you think, that's held operators back to date?
So there is definitely a change in the volume of data moving forward, and if you have time you can just visit our floor and see some of the demo we do in the what we call the new paradigm of TV, the immersive paradigm, like virtual reality, which is tomorrow for the operators. But if you look at the volume of data, that's certainly a changing, that would change the picture. But I think what has maybe why it has taken so long, from our experience, I think, when you have this subscription money fueling the whole business model of operators, the value of data is less important. If you look at the internet providers, they don't have the subscription money. From very early on, they invested in data and extracting insights out of the data. I guess operators add this subscription thing. The other thing, I guess, is also maybe a regulation. If you look at the US specifically, the Video Privacy Protection Act or the Cable Act, whatever is identifiable viewing records would be shared with very, very, would be problematic to share. So I guess regulation, maybe not the same volume as we envision of data, and definitely a very good business that would maybe not create such an opportunity for data. But all that is changing, I guess, and that's what we'll discuss in the panel.
So David, obviously Sky was one of the first to come forward with a practical application for big data. But do you think anything has changed in the last year or two that has made other companies start to play catch up, or in terms of the volumes you're processing, have there been any changes?
From our perspective, probably 5 years ago we had tons of data that was a little bit disparate, and I think we've curated it far better since then. And I think in that AdSmart's in its 3rd year of active trading, and in that period we've gone from about 400 individual ways of targeting a customer base up to about 1,200. So we've tripled it, and I think that's the thin end of the wedge. I think it's going to get far bigger and far more complicated, and I think the success people have seen us have, particularly with getting traction with businesses that, for a very good reason, had shied away from television per se. I think they see that happening and inevitably will follow in greater number.
Do you want to give just 1 minute on what Sky AdSmart allows advertisers to do?
AdSmart at its simplest is an optimized audience finder. So we have in the UK circa 12 million customers, about 7 million of them have the right kind of tech and have opted in to receive local content. And you can slice and dice that customer base by any combination of 1,200 different attributes to make sure that your ad is only seen by the people that matter to you, and by the way, only pay for it if we can evidence that it's been seen. So it means that for niche businesses, businesses constrained by geography or businesses limited by budget, you can use television to deliver your message with all the power and impact of TV precisely to the households that matter to you. So it's a game changer in that there's plenty of businesses for whom that was a must-have.
Okay. So brings us nicely on to my next theme, which is the money. Monetization of big data. I'm going to stay with you, David. You've just described what AdSmart does now. Where do you see the potential future for that sort of technology?
Well, we're already beginning a journey of transitioning the technology in a genuinely cross-platform fashion. We've got a product called Sky Advance, which means you can deliver a sequential message, tell a story about your brand, starting the journey on television and deliver it either across device or generally across the digital space. And that will increasingly become more powerful. But I think from certainly my perspective, the journey's got to start on TV. And if you've got a brand that lives on television, then you need to obviously follow that individual customer's journey via whatever platform they choose to engage with. And that's where we're at, and that gets a bit more complicated as engagement options become more numerous.
So you've talked about targeting multiple devices, targeting multiple audiences, but what about innovation around additional targeting? Is there more that can be done there?
I'm almost certain there is. We have innovated considerably in the last 3 years, and actually a couple of the areas haven't proven to be a commercial hit. So we're using the capacity that some of the data sets that we've deployed for better stuff. I think the key aspect is geographic. There's all sorts of subdivisions of people in terms of socio-demographic terms which are useful and interesting, but ultimately there's lots of practical reasons for some businesses to be constrained by geography. If you're a car dealer with a franchise from Honda, that might be defined in postcodes or a county or an urban conurbation, and to be able to mirror the legal restraints of a business perfectly, I think can only lead to far more opportunities for us, and I think we're seeing signs of that beginning to trigger a lot more business.
Thanks. And Antonio, what's Liberty doing around advertising?
So what we are doing is not very different from Sky, not as advanced as Sky. We are looking at running tests with addressable advertising in Belgium this year, probably going live with the system this year, and then rolling out to a number of other markets 2017 and 2018. So our strategy is not very different in terms of we see this as something that we should be doing. I think in lots of markets is the situation for Sky is slightly different in the sense that Sky has their own channels, and so some of those dynamics become easier. But we are working with a lot of broadcasters around our operations to start those discussions and understand how can, because it's really not one, it's not kind of, there's always the discussion about lots of these the broadcasters is about scale, and actually you can combine both, right? And we were talking about the location element, but also you can run a campaign at scale and then use targeted advertising to complement that campaign to get to some hard to reach audiences or something like that. So we are looking at different business models of how we can roll out addressable advertising across our markets and how we can start using our data assets as well to help from broadcasters to our content partners in terms of better content decisions, and so we're looking at doing lots of things in this space.
Sure. I mean, advertising's an obvious starting point because it's a big chunk of the TV economy. It's very easy to measure return on investment when you are innovative around the use of targeting. Arguably, though, the faster growing segment of the industry is the pay TV segment, the subscription element. What can be done, or what can you mine from big data that allows you either to grow that or protect that segment of your business?
So, Liberty Global has gone through 3 phases. We just entered the 3rd phase. The first phase was really about connectivity, having faster speeds, and I think we do that very well. The second phase was around products, better products, video products, entertainment, connectivity products, and we just went through this restructuring, and the 3rd phase is customer. And actually a lot of the investments we are doing in the data space are actually with an internal focus, in the sense that the internal use cases are paying for a lot of the investment we are doing. So even if we're not doing anything from an external perspective, from an addressable advertising perspective, we would still do these investments in that. And we are looking to do things such as, better content decisions. And better content decision doesn't mean reduce cost, right? Sometimes there's that perception that, we can use this data for better negotiation, so we can have a cost saving. It doesn't mean that. It means better, and sometimes better data means you can make better decisions and often spend more, but you are making informed decisions of how you make those content decisions. From product, in terms of navigation, in terms of understanding better our customers, from messaging, from marketing, from customer experience. So we are really looking at how data can improve our decision making across the whole company. So there's a very strong focus at Liberty Global on the customer and how the customer is in the center of a lot of what we do, and clearly data is powering a lot of that.
Sure. And Alain, what are you seeing in terms of the potential for big data to, in particular, serve and improve margins in the subscription business?
Yeah, so the way we traditionally look at it, we are a technology vendor, unlike our colleagues here at operators. We look at the market as like inbound opportunities for operator and outbound opportunities. What can they do with the data? So definitely, can operator improve their own processes? So Antonio discussed a little bit the content marketing, maybe content production as well can be influenced by data as well for certain operators. Cross-selling, share prediction, these kind of things are really inbound. They improve the metrics and the services of the operators. And on the other hand, you have the outbound, which is more the audience measurement, addressable TV, etc. So I guess the opportunities are on the 2 sides of the fence. As you said, I think the inbound may be a little bit less measurable in terms of ROI, but definitely there is a clear interest to go into the direction from operators.
So among your partners, what are the key innovations that you think you're seeing around the use of big data?
So it's a very, first of all, it's a fascinating space. Okay, it's lots of innovation. And as you may have noticed, tell me if I pronounce it well, the owl? Owl, sorry. So the owl, basically, from Viaccess-Orca's perspective, symbolizes the 2 directions where we invest our innovation. The smartness in one hand, so the what we do with the data, the algorithm. We have a team of data scientists. We have invested in that for years. So I think the innovation we see currently in machine learning and everything helped by big CPUs, etc., allows our customer to extract more insights out of the data. This is clearly an area of innovation that is fascinating. On the other hand, you have the security. How can I protect all that? So more and more the data is handled in the cloud. How can I give strong cloud protection to that data? Both areas are very exciting in terms of what you see in innovation, and this is where BO wants to play. We are very interestingly position at the junction between those the smartness and the safeness, and you try to play there.
Sure. There's a well-known movie called Minority Report, which is about police who arrive at a crime scene before the crime is committed. Obviously that is fantasy, but I see the potential in data and in correctly mined information to predict the future. How far away are we from that, and are you doing anything around, for example, churn prediction, behaviour around advertising, or anything that is, you know, sci-fi enough for this question?
I'll pick an answer that sits somewhere between that question and the previous one, because, like Antonio said, Sky's the customer is absolutely at the heart of everything we do, and I think where big data is helping shape our traction as a pay TV provider and how that needs to continue, the role big data plays in that is, for example, in making sure that the product is as good as it can possibly be for an individual household. So, for example, as I sort of look into the future, the new Sky Q box has, I think, about 20 different adaptive EPG profiles, and depending on how you behave and how you engage with it, it will adjust and adapt and present and curate our content in a way that is more relevant to that particular household. And I think within individual households you can have 5 different ones depending on who's watching. So I think that's a sort of step forward, that we begin to deliver effectively the same content in a more bespoke way that is shaped by big data. And to go back to the previous question, the more effectively and the better we do that, the stronger that umbilical cord is.
Antonio, what about churn prediction, for example? Can you identify from customer behaviour at-risk customers and implement a strategy either through the interface or other methods to retain that customer?
I mean, we can, I guess. I think churn prediction and churn modeling has been part of the business for a long time. I think what has changed is better data, broader data, in the sense of not only much more data about what our customers are, complemented, not only our data, complemented with third-party data, the data we collect from our products in terms of how they are using certain services, and usage is a very good predictor of, you know, whether someone is going to churn or not. And so a lot of that's what is changing, I think, and that's going to allow us to have a much better capabilities in terms of understanding what our customers are doing and what they are happy with and what they are not happy with, and then being proactive. And I guess, to David's point, reaching out to those customers with different messages, different content, understanding, for example, when we launch a new video product, you know, what customers are using that video product and what's important for them. So when we go and do deals on content, you know, be much more informed in making those content decisions. So I think it's some of the things you're saying has been going on for a while, but now we have better data, much more data in real time in some cases, in terms of making those decisions now rather than in 3 months' time. So I think things are moving slowly and kind of better and better in some of those areas.
Right. So Alain, you were talking to me downstairs about the virtual reality and the volume of data that you can pull off, tracking eye position, etc. But is all data equal? I mean, a lot of that is going to be noise. How do you drill down to the really key monetizable data points?
So definitely not all data is born equal, that's for sure. You know, I answer your question maybe from a different angle. I mean, of course, the more data you collect, the bigger the need to clean it and to filter it, etc., etc. But just specifically to your question, which is all data equal, I would like to answer that there is definitely not, and that there is clearly one category that is of interest to, I guess, everybody, which is the real-time data. At least for marketers, this is, I believe, the holy grail. And just if you judging by the efforts that the Facebooks and the Twitters are investing into trying to get into the TV business, so to say, and the live TV business, I think that tells us a lot as to how valuable this real-time data is. I think VR, because you are able to collect in real time a lot of data, has this element potentially into it. Understanding the context, getting more insights as to signal of intent from the users, and I think from that angle, this is a very specific category of data, real-time data, that marketers will be very interested into getting into.
Okay, so David, real-time data is, as a category, is that the most monetizable, or are there other data elements that you would identify as really strong in terms of monetization potential?
I think from a commercial perspective, the conversations that we have with businesses that resonate most powerfully are not real time, but they're recent time, insofar as we are, and this will stray into a subsequent discussion, I'm sure, about privacy, in that businesses struggle to know who their customers are in a definable way. And one of the challenges we have is reassuring them that overcoming all of the obvious and necessary concerns about privacy, if we can work with them to analyze their current customer base and work out which of their customer base are either ours as well or who look like Sky customers, then we can create advertising opportunities that are genuinely commercially exciting, because they know they're cutting out waste in absolute terms. So I would say, recent data is really key. You need it to be sufficiently scalable. In terms of the sort of real-time stuff that we use on a practical basis, the vast majority of the data that Sky use in AdSmart is third-party. We're buying it in the way that anybody could. The one data set that is our own, which again, bearing in mind all the privacy issues, is stuff about people moving house. People tend not to want to pay a pay TV subscription in a house they don't live in. So they tell us that, and that is extremely current and constantly updated, and in that sense, fairly real time. Beyond that, I think we're encouraging people to take a slightly measured view in the context of TV advertising, and use solid, reliable, recent data rather than absolute real-time stuff.
And Antonio, you may or may not be buying in data, but you certainly have a mass of data fed off TiVo boxes and other boxes in the Liberty network. Other than sort of audience insight, which I guess is potentially real time, what are the main pieces of information that you're gleaning that you see as monetizable for the future?
You mean from the STBs?
The data you're getting from your boxes, your set tops.
I guess the viewership element, and the viewership element is actually can give you many things. Can give you not only in terms of what someone is viewing and what content gets seen, but even things like how they get to certain things, right? In terms of content or areas of DPG, or even patterns of behavior. So for example, if you see that someone during a certain period is going on holiday, and so those types of things are potentially very valuable from the data we are getting from the box. But we see it. The data is a very important piece to your point about different values, but we don't see it as that as the only thing. We get third-party data, we are integrating with our CRM systems, we're integrating with other product entitlement, customer data. So what we see really valuable is when you start bringing these multiple data sets together. That starts painting a much more interesting picture. And to your point earlier about, for example, monetizing segments. So for example, and prediction, clearly, and that's already happening a lot in the US, and maybe Sky is doing it, is not only targeting someone because of where they live or because of how they behave, but how they will behave. So thinking about segmentation, but in terms of predictive segmentation. So how likely are you to purchase a certain car? How likely are you to buy a BMW in the next 3 months? And start doing those sorts of elements. But to do that, you do need multiple pieces of data together to have some really valuable segments.
Actually, if I can just add to that, that house moving data in terms of predictive information is really useful. So if you're a furniture retailer, the people you want to speak to more than anybody is someone who's just moved house or is just about to move house. And then just to also add the real-time aspect of it, we are transitioning from a viewing panel of 500,000 up to 3 million by January, which I think makes it the biggest in the world, or certainly the biggest in the world in relation to the size of the audience it's measuring. So having got a customer in place to feel comfortable about advertising, possibly for the first time on TV, the real-time data is really valuable in giving them a next-day validation of exactly what happened. So all sorts of benchmarks have to be crossed to qualify as an impression. You've got to see 3/4 of the ad, and we've got evidence that you were interacting with the box beforehand, but the advertiser will see that the next day and on a panel that's measuring almost 1 in 2. So pretty robust and pretty real.
So, and just something that is combining both of the things you are talking, and it's a very simple example, but for example, by monitoring and by collecting data on different ads, and when ads are shown, just as a simple example, you could detect that, for example, Sky in UK ran an ad, and that could trigger in real time a Facebook campaign for Virgin Media, for example. So that's just a simple example, but it's an example of where getting this data and start thinking of it, and in this case in real time you can do that and kind of across multiple elements. So I think there's many use cases, and so it's about thinking what are clearly targeting the ones that are most valuable first, but I think it's thinking through the possibilities.
And sorry, one other addendum to that is we talked about Sky Advance earlier, this idea of telling a story across platforms. So the way the real-time aspect of that works is that if we know that in a particular household an ad's been seen, let's say 3 times, then that's when we take that real-time data and begin the journey of just displaying the same video ad or banner ad on whatever mobile devices that advertiser's chosen, on devices that are linked to that Sky account.
Great. Any questions from the audience before I move on? Raise your hand. Okay. Well, one of the things that hasn't come up, and I'm quite surprised it hasn't, is content targeting. There are rumours, sometimes denied, that Netflix uses data analytics to target its original production. Is there a risk in using data in the creative space that content becomes homogenized and uninteresting, rather like the new car market? Alain, have you got?
So I have my opinion on that one. Okay, I think we live in the information age where a teenager in the US, on the east coast of the US or west coast or in Kazakhstan or in Israel, they more or less see the same. It doesn't. I'm not sure it has to do with big data analytics. It has to do with leveling of content, preferences. That's the way the world goes now. What big data, I think, that big data analytics can give you is a better insights into certain segments, into niches, and that I think, from that perspective, that's not necessarily in the direction that you think it brings it. So, generally speaking, I think everybody more or less looks at the same. Geography, and it's scientifically proved that way, more or less, that geography doesn't impact a lot into what you see. But I think definitely big data can give you additional insights on specific segments that you may have into your audience. So I'm not pessimistic into the impact big data may have on content creation. On the other hand,
pessimistic, Antonio, David, or is big data the sort of way to the future of content production?
A personal view is that I think big data in that context gets close to the risk of content development by a giant committee, which would create something potentially bland. And I think the diversity and quality that we see suggests that that's not happening, that we are relying on talented people to predict and develop stuff that our audiences lap up.
Antonio, any view?
Well, I agree. I think sometimes the Netflix example is slightly exaggerated. The idea that you just put a number of actors and directors and so on into a machine and suddenly you have a new series that is going to be a hit. I think sometimes that's exaggerated, and Netflix doesn't really contradict that, because I guess maybe that's good for them to have that perception, but I don't think that is happening, and I don't think it's certainly informing informing some decisions in the sense of understanding what customers value and the different segments, what is valuable or not. It's certainly in the recommendation space, and clearly that's a big role. In terms of actually content production, I think it's one tool out of many tools in the box. I don't think there's a risk of just having machines coming up with new series. I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay, sure. Another area, and David, you actually touched on it with what you were saying about the Sky EPG, but it's the potential through tracking customer behavior to serve up an entirely customized user interface for content discovery and navigation. To what extent is that being done, and what potential do you see? Do you think there will be a day when every single viewer's navigation interface is different? Alain?
So we are already implementing lots of personalization in the user interface. We're enabling that with our technology. So, you know, it's I mean, we've invested in recommendation since maybe 10 years. We've been doing recommendings and recommender engine, etc., etc. So that's definitely the sense of history, having everybody having their own customized journey into the content. So yeah, I think that's clearly the direction you're going to see more and more customized journey into content. Yeah.
David, you did mention that you were serving up 20 variations, was it, of the Sky EPG?
I believe, yeah, and I'm not the technologist, but that's what is embedded in the Sky Q box. So the point there is that each individual household is by and large only going to see one iteration of that. So it isn't as if the thing is constantly changing and adapting to their behaviour. I'd like to make a broader point about how granular advertising could get. This is the bit I'm concerned in. Relevant advertising is really powerful. It's far more powerful than irrelevant advertising. And if you think about good advertising as needing to be entertaining, it's a bit like going to an intimate comedy show or theatre, which is sort of small and you feel involved and it feels relevant. But if the performer comes right up close to you, it's very uncomfortable. And I think there's a point where advertising just becomes counterproductive if you are too specific. So we know from talking to advertisers that they get terrific feedback if in an ad break where you're expecting to see national or internationally syndicated ads appearing in some quality broadcast content, and then all of a sudden there's an ad that's beautifully made but pops up with some local geographic references, either visually or verbally or both. It really has cut through, and I think that context really works. That might be in the context of a postcode, a town or a city or a county or whatever it might be. But if you started saying, David, this is the car you need to buy, that would be way too far, and we'll never get to that. It'll make no commercial sense to get to that, so it won't happen.
Thanks. Okay, well, I'm going to move on to my next theme, which is it's an important topic, and it's privacy. Data breaches. There's been a few high-profile ones at TalkTalk in the UK. Obviously, as the volume of data that you are gathering and storing becomes greater, is it inevitable that there's a greater risk of data breaches? And what can be done, and what are you doing to prevent breaches? I guess Alain, in the. So
first of all, you have to partner with guys that understand a little bit about protecting valuable assets, and more and more in the cloud, because I'm not sure what the architecture looks like, but I guess for our customer, more and more of this data is handled in the cloud, so they need to process that in a secure way. So from anonymization, tokenization, etc., etc. I hope to very, very interesting, innovation. I mentioned that previously, that you see a lot of innovation around how can I secure and process data in the cloud, stuff like homomorphic cryptography, etc. So that's a little bit far ahead, but that's definitely something, an interesting direction that we want to play as well. First of all, you have to apply what's called privacy-enabling technologies. So under the GDPR, the new regulation of the European Union, I guess we will discuss this later, you have these new techniques. But as well, you have to design systems from start with privacy in mind, what they call privacy by design. security and privacy by design. Okay, and this is, I guess, where people like us, like Viaccess-Orca, with their 20 years of experience in security, can definitely help operators protect those assets.
Antonio, any views on risk of data breach as data gets more voluminous?
I agree with what Alain just said totally. I think you need to partner with people that know a lot about it. I think there's this balance and this, to do a lot of the things we were discussing before, that involves bringing these data sets together to allow us to understand what our customers really want. And that and when you start doing that, that's where you start having these privacy issues and in terms of what data you collect, what you don't collect, what you can bring together. And so there's those dangers. I think we try to be very, very careful. We try to use the data for the things we say we are going to use it for, and not use it for things that our customers don't understand. And that's not easy, because I think in the online space there's an understanding you're not paying for Facebook, so they need to make their money somehow. I think on the pay TV business is slightly different, and in fact there was a survey where the majority of respondents, or I don't know, maybe only 20% knew that pay TV operators were actually collecting some data on them. So there's a lot of work to be done, and it's not just about meeting the regulation. I think we need to go a step further. So I think we need to is a message, is a position that you have from a privacy perspective. For us as a pay TV operator, we would not do, certainly, for example, in the advertising space, we would not do that if that would jeopardize our core business, right? So we need to be very, very careful in that space, in what we do with the data and what we collect and how we process it and so on. And partner with the right people that know how to do that well.
And David already touched on it when he was talking about advertising, but at what point does personalization become snooping? I'm inundated with personalized emails from Amazon, identifying the fact that I've been looking at particular products, not buying, just looking at, and that sort of smacks of snooping. How do you get that balance right in terms of personalization versus a threatening sort of machine?
So I have to go now in a second, but just to finish, I think that's a very good point, and is one that is hard to. You need to think about it very carefully, and I think if there's doubt, you shouldn't do it. And from a regulation perspective, actually, the regulation that you see on the online space is very different than the one that touches the telecommunication space. So I think it's a lot stricter in that space to prevent some of the things you're talking about. But I think, yeah.
Okay, well, I know you have to leave, Antonio, so we'll say goodbye to you and thank you very much for your input. Thanks. David, what about the question of going too far with data? You touched on it around advertising, but what are the risks and how do you prevent that?
The risks are huge. It's absolutely fundamental, and customer at the heart, being at the heart of everything, means we are go out of our way to make sure that we don't have any of the issues that TalkTalk experienced, and I think we do a lot to reassure our customers that that's the case. I should point out that AdSmart works by taking data sets and appending them at a household level rather than an individual level. So there's a degree of safety in that. One of the aspects in which this concern manifests itself is, I mentioned earlier, about helping customers understand who their audience is, and that requires taking data from them. And they're all understandably nervous about that. So we have to reassure them that we are absolutely exemplary in the way that we protect our own customers' privacy, to reassure them that the same applies in relation to their own. So data is always anonymized and destroyed as soon as any analysis has been done. So it's a fundamental, critical issue to avoid any sense that that's going on.
Sure. I'm going to stick with you, David. So the EU is rightly concerned about privacy and the use of data. There is a general data protection regulation around consent for use of data. I believe that AdSmart works on a panel basis, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. So given the hassle of getting consent for specific uses from every customer, is that in the future just a small print issue? Can you get around it with your standard subscriber contract? Or do we think that the future of big data is actually a panel, which in a way kind of misses the big bit?
Well, the panel in question is about to scale up to 3 million, as I mentioned, so measuring 1 in 2. But that's all that's giving us is viewing information. We're not extracting much from that shapes our advertising sales strategy. That's all publicly available third-party data that we're appending to a household level, not to an individual level. So, in terms of privacy, it's paramount. But
Alain, any input?
The question I have is that, you mentioned this GDPR, the General Privacy Directive from the EU. So I was wondering, because you guys, maybe the question for you, now with the Brexit, I'm not sure how that impacts you guys in the UK.
Well, I don't think we're sure either at this stage. It's a big deal.
But yes, I'm not sure what your question was, but we definitely see. I think that what this regulation basically introduces, first of all, it revisits the definition of data. What is a personal data? What is not? These categories of pseudonymous data, anonymous data, etc., with various regime applied to each category of data. And as you mentioned, you have to justify the grounds for processing the data. It has to be storage limited, purpose limited. So all that introduces, I think, so to say, a risk for the data processors. And I think what it means is that the innovation around data, around big data will continue, for sure. But the need to take into account privacy and the risk of it, because it's stiff financial penalties associated to those who don't meet the EU policy. So you will have to innovate under certain constraints. That's what it changes, I think, mainly.
Just to finish that you mentioned about the opting in element of privacy, and I think it's important to keep the context of that clear when considering AdSmart. We're not asking customers to opt into telling us loads about them and having us access how they view and sharing that data. We don't need to do that. As I say, we're buying profiling data largely from third parties, bar one or two very minor aspects about moving house. The only opt-in that they need to give us is to see targeted advertising. They're going to see advertising anyway. It's an ad, part ad-funded pay TV platform, so they accept that. So the question that is asked of them is: you're going to see some advertising. Would you like to see advertising that is more relevant or less relevant? And for the most part, they opt in on that basis. So we're always mindful of never getting close to any breach of privacy.
So using third-party suppliers for a lot of the insight, I guess, is one way around that issue. Cool. Okay. Let's move on in our last 10 minutes to our next topic, which is audience insight. And I guess the big question is, you now have access to incredibly rich audience insight, real-time, second-by-second, potentially, viewing behavior data. Can operator data ever become a currency for advertising? Because Barb persists and survives and flourishes because it is a recognized currency. Can we ever see a day where operator-fed set-top box data becomes a currency?
Question. I can start with this issue. So, I think operators' data has lots of benefits. First of all, it's granular. The panel is wider. It's called census data because you don't have to basically rely on a very limited panel like as the traditional Nielsen measurement would do. So lots of benefit. At the same time, as we talk today, there are still some weaknesses with operator data. I think the first one is that it's the footprints are not I would say balkanized, if you want, or fragmented. Okay, so in the US, for instance, it's very hard to get with one operator a coverage of all the US. So you have to to get data from various operators, and if there is no any form of standardization, either driven by regulation or even by industry, I mean, it will stay like that, like fragmented, okay? The second problem is that it's biased. You know, usually pay TV is a little bit, is representing higher income revenue kind of household. So there's some bias to operator data. But I think there's lots of promise into that. Okay, so to the question, will it replace the Nielsen's and the like in terms of currency? I'm not sure that's for tomorrow. That will certainly be a complementary to this kind of data. But if the footprint stuff is fixed somehow, that might well pave the way for a new currency at some point.
David, anything you're doing around using your own data with your advertising clients?
Well, plenty, but not as a currency for wider market use. You know, in terms of the currency of choice in the UK broadcast market, it's BARB data, to which Sky is a fully fledged supporter and paid up member of, and we will continue to be so going forward. All the concerns we previously mentioned about doing the right thing in terms of privacy means that we couldn't ever release any data to become some sort of currency, even if we chose to, but we choose not to. We choose to rely on BARB for our mainstream linear broadcast business, and where we have our own data, we'll use it for our own commercial benefit.
Okay, sure. So Netflix doesn't release any data. They are infamous, even with their suppliers, for not giving consumption and audience data out to their content partners. Does the opportunities around big data, I guess, not make audience research and viewing time irrelevant, but does it open up other opportunities for gauging a return on investment that are perhaps more ethereal than simply viewing time? Okay.
So the question is what return on investment? How can we quantify this return on investment?
Yeah, other ways other than simply X number of viewers or.
So that's a tricky question. You know, we've been in the recommendation business for 10 years, and assessing the ROI of a recommendation is you can do that, but it's subject to so many factors as well. So at the end of the day, I think. You may put a figure in terms of ROI, but what all this big data analytics brings beyond a mere figure is really understanding your audience, understanding what people want, and and coming from a state of blindness to a state of now you're aware of what people want, understanding your audience. So that has a lot of value, and it may be sometimes for certain use case difficult to associate it a specific ROI, but still lots of value associated to that. Understanding your audience.
Sure.
I can understand why Netflix don't release their data, but in terms of ROI, from an advertising perspective, there's lots of other ways to alight upon some really, hard and fast facts about how effective advertising can be without having to access that kind of information. Just sharing sales data and tracking it back to households we know were exposed to an ad via AdSmart is a pretty compelling way to demonstrate return on investment, and we've got lots of advertisers that have enjoyed that journey with us, and we expect to do many more.
Sure. Any questions from the audience before we move to our next theme? Okay, we're going to move on to technology, appropriately enough. So when the DVR came along, there was a lot of concern among advertisers, for example, about ad skipping, recording a show and missing all the ads. Are we moving into a future where the real threat will become data blocking?
So I guess from the set-top boxes, which is a closed environment, I guess you won't necessarily see like ad blockings or analytics blocking. I think that's less of a challenge, But certainly, if you look at certain market like Germany, for instance, I was reading like recently that I think it's about 20% of the traffic is influenced by analytics blocking, what they call it. I think that definitely has an impact. I know for TV, as I said, set-top box-based TV, I guess the closed environment more or less preserves us. But ad blocking and analytics blocking will definitely have an impact. That's for sure. You might see a lot of innovation around that as well. How to circumvent that as well.
Sure. So, David, you obviously don't have the problem with AdSmart because it's an opt-in panel. But in the future, do you think that there's potential for your customers to block the data feeds that you need to analyze other elements of the return?
Well, the only one they can block is a new customer deciding that they don't want to see targeted advertising. Not many of them do that, but that's possible. In terms of ad blocking, every home's got an ad blocker in the form of a remote control. They can just turn over if they don't want to see an ad and watch the BBC. And some do, but plenty don't. So I certainly don't see either being a particular significant issue for us.
Sure. One of the things that is a significant issue, though, is, and we've touched on it, is the volume of data and the skill set that's needed to process and gain insight from that. I know that Liberty is doing a lot of that in-house. Obviously, Sky AdSmart is an in-house initiative. But is there a future when, given that the volume of data is set to grow about tenfold in just 5 years, when it won't be something that's done in-house, but it will require an outside specialist in data analytics to handle that data and give you the insight you need?
I think we've got a bit of a blend of that. We've certainly got a huge amount of really talented people within Sky that are helping us develop our product offering, but they lean on some data specialists in the form of Experian and the like to help package it up in a way that's meaningful for us. So I suspect it's probably a blend of the two, but again, I'm just the sales guy dealing with customers and not the tech one.
Sure. And Alain, as a technology provider, are you having partners come to you and say, look, we can't handle this data, we need someone to do it for us?
Yeah, so as I said, I think the third-party technology providers may help in two directions, as I said. First of all, bring all these algorithmics and data science expertise. It's a very scarce resource. So if people have very strong algorithms and data science team, this is something you can definitely look for partners. And on the other hand, protecting all that in the cloud, making sure that all the real-time analytics that you can extract and all that is protected and is processed according to the regulation, etc., etc. So I do believe that we'll see more and more potentially third party that will try and put themselves in this position of helping operators, extract value from the data and making sure that they comply with the regulation, etc., etc. So, yeah.
Sure. At the moment, though, we're looking at operator data. A lot of it's handled in-house. They're walled gardens of data. Is there a need or even an opportunity for standardization of the way that, for example, data is tagged or metadata around the information that could in the future open up the potential to use that data across a wider analytic base?
I think the one opportunity I see is, for instance, audience measurement. If operators want to offer like a new currency, this is something I mentioned previously. Definitely some form of interoperability or standardization will be welcome. But you're right, as long as this is an inside process and internal processes, this is dealt with, But I guess that will come. The need for that will come. The Nielsen panel has its own limitation, and I think there are lots of people interested in creating another alternative currencies. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, well, we're running out of time. I'm just going to ask one final question to each of our panelists. And it's a bit of a fun question, but if there were no concerns about privacy, you didn't need any consent for anything, there were no technical restraints around volumes of data, David, what is the one piece of information you would love to know about your customers?
I generally have conversations with advertisers where we say, look, we can either talk to exactly the people you want to advertise to or get incredibly close to that ultimate aim. And there isn't much left, from my perspective, to see the sort of things that we might want to add to that. So that kind of nirvana of only advertising to the people that matter and only paying for it if we know they've seen it is a journey we're already on. I actually can't think of much else to add apart from just being better at it.
Sure. Alain, any ideas on what the sort of holy grail of information would be?
So for me, as I mentioned, the real-time data, signals of intent. I see the operator launching like voice command, for instance. So controlling your interfaces with voice. If you could extract out of that, signal of intent signals, I think that would be, and I'm sure lots of people, but a number of people are already looking into that. That can give you a lot of idea of expressiveness and state of mind, etc., etc. So I guess that's some kind of holy grail. We're not there yet, but I'm sure people are looking at it.
Great, thanks. Okay, well, we've run out of time, so if there are no burning questions, raise your hand if there are, and we'll take them last minute. Otherwise, it just remains to thank my remaining panelists, David and Alain. Thank you very much.
And thanks to you.